Don't, it still hurts there. When the rancher understood, the whole town was shaken. The town sat quietly between wide fields and low hills, a place where time moved slowly and days followed the same pattern. People woke up early, worked hard, and slept early. Nothing much ever changed there, and that was how the townspeople liked it. At the far edge of this town, where the dirt road turned narrow and the land opened wide, stood a large ranch. It was old, built from strong wood and stone, and surrounded by fences that had been repaired many times over the years. This ranch belonged to a man everyone knew, even if they did not truly know him. His name was spoken with respect. Some spoke it with admiration, others with quiet caution. He was known as a strong rancher, a man who could work from sunrise to sunset without rest. He had broad shoulders, hands rough from years of labor, and eyes that rarely showed what he felt inside. He did not talk much, and when he did, his words were short and direct. People believed he was simply born that way, hard, silent, and unbreakable. Every morning before the sun fully rose, he was already awake. The rancher stepped outside his house while the air was still cool and fresh. He took a deep breath, looking over the land that stretched far in front of him. The fields were quiet, covered with soft morning light. Animals moved slowly, and the sounds of the ranch felt calm and familiar. This routine had been his life for many years. Work kept his mind busy and his body tired, and that was exactly how he wanted it. He walked the same paths every day, checking fences, feeding animals, fixing small problems before they became big ones. His movements were steady, practiced, almost automatic. Anyone watching him could tell he knew this land better than anyone else. It was said that he could notice even the smallest change, a broken board, an unusual sound, a missing tool. To the town, he seemed in complete control, a man who had built everything with his own hands. But what the town did not see was what happened when the work slowed down. When the sun climbed high and the ranch fell into a quiet rhythm, there were moments when the rancher stopped and stared into the distance. His eyes would rest on certain parts of the land longer than others. In those moments, his strong posture softened slightly, and something heavy seemed to pass through him. But as soon as anyone came near, he straightened up again, putting the weight back onto his shoulders and continuing as if nothing had happened. The rancher did not visit town often. When he did, it was only for supplies or necessary business. He did not stay to chat, and he did not join gatherings. People greeted him politely, and he nodded in return. Some tried to start conversations, but they rarely went far. After a while, people stopped trying. They told themselves he preferred being alone, that his life on the ranch was enough for him. Stories about him filled the quiet spaces of the town. Some said he had always been alone. Others said he had once been different, more open, more alive. No one knew the full truth because the rancher never spoke about his past. The past stayed locked behind his silence, buried under years of work and routine. Children in the town were warned to behave when near his land, not because he was unkind, but because he was serious. He doesn't like trouble, parents would say, and it was true. He did not like noise, chaos, or surprises. Still, those who truly paid attention noticed that he was fair. He paid workers on time, helped neighbors during difficult seasons, and never asked for praise. He did what needed to be done and expected nothing in return. At night, when the ranch finally grew quiet, the rancher returned to his house. It was clean but simple, with few decorations. The furniture was old but well kept. There were no pictures on the walls, no signs of family or celebrations. Only one room stayed locked, its door never opened. No one else had ever been inside, and the rancher never spoke of it. Sometimes, late at night, he sat on the porch and watched the stars. The sky over the ranch was wide and clear, filled with light. In those moments, memories surfaced quietly like shadows passing through his mind. He did not fight them anymore, but he did not welcome them either. He let them pass, then stood up and went inside, closing the door behind him. To the town, the rancher was a symbol of strength. People believed he had chosen this life and that he was content with it. They admired his discipline and the way he kept everything in order. But strength, as they understood it, meant never breaking, never showing weakness. They did not realize that strength could also mean carrying pain without letting it show. The land itself seemed to understand him better than the people did. Certain areas of the ranch were always quiet, untouched, even though they could have been used. The rancher avoided them without explanation. He worked around them as if those places carried a weight that could not be disturbed. No one questioned it because no one dared to. Seasons came and went. The ranch survived storms, dry periods, and long winters. Through it all, the rancher remained the same, steady, silent, and reliable. He never complained, never asked for help, and never spoke about what lay beneath the surface of his calm expression. Yet deep inside, there was a place that still hurt. It was not visible, and it was not something he could fix with tools or hard work. It was tied to the land, to a moment long ago that had shaped everything that came after. He believed that as long as he kept moving, kept working, that pain would remain quiet. The town continued its simple life, unaware that one small moment in the future would break this silence. A moment that would make the rancher speak words he had never planned to say. Words that would open a door he had kept closed for years. For now, everything seemed the same. The ranch stood strong, the man worked without rest, and the town believed they understood him. But beneath the calm surface, something waited, patient, unresolved, and powerful enough to change how everyone saw him forever. The day began like any other on the ranch. The sun rose slowly, painting the sky with soft colors, and the land woke up in silence. The rancher followed his usual routine, moving from one task to another without much thought. His body knew what to do even when his mind drifted elsewhere. Work had always been his way of keeping life steady. As long as his hands were busy, his thoughts stayed quiet. That morning, someone new arrived at the ranch. It was a young helper sent by a neighbor who had asked the rancher for temporary assistance. The young man was polite, eager to work, and full of energy. He talked more than the rancher was used to, asking questions about the land, the animals, and the fences. The rancher listened quietly, answering only when needed. He did not mind the help, but he preferred silence. As the day moved forward, the sun climbed higher, and the work became heavier. The young helper followed closely, trying to learn how things were done. He did not notice the small signs around him, the way the rancher slowed near certain places, or how his eyes avoided specific corners of the land. To the young man, everything looked the same: open fields, wooden fences, and long paths shaped by years of use. At one point, they reached a section of the ranch that had not been touched in a long time. The grass there was taller, the fence older, and the ground uneven. The young helper, thinking he was being useful, stepped forward and began moving things aside, clearing the area without asking. He laughed lightly and said something about making the place better. The rancher froze. It was not sudden or loud, but it was clear. His body stopped moving and his hand tightened around the tool he was holding. His breath caught for a moment. The land in front of him felt closer than it should have, as if it had pulled him back in time. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. The young helper did not notice at first. He kept working, pulling at old boards and stepping deeper into the area. That was when the rancher finally spoke, his voice low but sharp. "Don't," he said. The word hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. The young man turned around, surprised. He had not expected such a strong reaction from someone who rarely showed emotion. "It still hurts there," the rancher added quietly. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that could not be ignored. The young helper stopped moving. He did not fully understand what had just been said, but he felt that he had crossed an invisible line. He nodded, stepped back, and waited without asking questions. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The rancher looked at the ground, then at the old fence, then away from it all. His face showed something different now, not anger, but pain mixed with memory. After a while, he took a slow breath and motioned for the young man to follow him elsewhere. They continued working, but the mood had changed. The rancher was quieter than before, and the young helper felt unsure. He wanted to apologize but did not know how. He could tell that what he had seen was not meant to be seen. By the afternoon, the work was done. The young helper thanked the rancher and prepared to leave. Before going, he looked back once more at the untouched area and then at the rancher. Without saying much, he nodded again, this time with respect. The rancher returned the nod but said nothing. When the young helper returned to town, he could not stop thinking about what had happened. He told someone close to him, carefully choosing his words. He did not want to spread rumors, but he also could not keep the moment to himself. The story traveled quietly at first, moving from one person to another, always with the same sentence repeated in hushed voices. He said it still hurts there. People were confused. Some were curious. Others felt uneasy. The rancher had always been a strong figure, someone who seemed untouched by emotion. The idea that a piece of land could cause him pain made people rethink what they believed about him. A few days later, the rancher came into town for supplies. He noticed the looks this time. They were not the usual respectful glances. There was concern now, and something else, understanding mixed with guilt. People realized they had never asked him anything about his life. They had assumed they knew him just because they saw him every day. Someone greeted him and paused as if wanting to say more. The rancher nodded and continued walking. He felt exposed, though no one had asked him a single question. The words he had spoken on the ranch echoed in his mind. He had never meant to say them out loud. They had slipped out, carried by a moment he could not control. That night back at the ranch, he walked alone under the fading light. His steps slowed as he neared the old area again. He stopped at a distance, not crossing into it. The memories came quietly now, not as sharp as before, but still present. He did not push them away. For the first time in many years, he let himself stand there and feel them fully. He remembered a time when the land felt different, when laughter had filled the air, and when life felt complete. Those days were gone, but the mark they left had never faded. He had chosen silence because it was easier than explaining pain that could not be fixed. The rancher sat down on a nearby fence and looked up at the sky. He wondered if speaking those words had been a mistake, but deep inside he felt a small shift, like a door opening just a little. The pain was still there, but it was no longer entirely hidden. In town, people talked less and thought more. They looked at the ranch differently now. They realized that every place held stories, and every quiet person carried something unseen. The rancher had not changed, but the way others saw him had. The land remained still, waiting. And the man who had spent years avoiding one truth had taken the first step toward facing it, even if he did not yet know what that would mean for him, or for the town that was slowly beginning to understand. After that day, something quiet but powerful began to change. It did not happen all at once, and it did not come with loud words or big actions. It moved slowly, like the wind across the fields, touching everything in its path without being seen. The rancher returned to his usual routine, but inside him, the balance he had kept for so many years felt different. He woke up early as always and stepped outside into the cool morning air. The land looked the same, yet it did not feel the same. His eyes moved toward the place he had warned the young helper about. He did not walk there, but he noticed it more than before. It was as if the land was reminding him that silence no longer worked the way it used to. In town, people were quieter around his name. The gossip that usually filled empty moments faded into thoughtful pauses. No one wanted to speak carelessly anymore. They remembered the sentence that had spread through the town and realized how much weight it carried. For the first time, many of them wondered what it truly meant to be strong. One afternoon, an older neighbor visited the ranch. This was someone who had lived in the town long enough to remember parts of the past, though not all of it. He brought a small tool the rancher had lent him years ago and had never asked for back. The visit felt simple, but both men knew it was more than that. They stood near the fence, talking about work, weather, and the land. Their conversation moved slowly, with long pauses. At one point, the neighbor looked toward the untouched area and then back at the rancher. "I always wondered about that place," he said gently. The rancher felt his chest tighten, but he did not turn away. He stayed still, his eyes on the horizon. "Some things don't need fixing," he replied. The neighbor nodded. He did not push further. That small exchange, simple as it was, carried respect. It told the rancher that he did not need to explain everything to be understood. Later that evening, the rancher sat alone on his porch. The sky darkened slowly, and the first stars appeared. He thought about the past more clearly now, not as something chasing him, but as something waiting to be acknowledged. He remembered a time when the ranch was full of warmth, when voices filled the air and the land felt alive in a different way. There had been someone else once, someone who shared this land and believed in its future. Together, they had planned, worked, and dreamed. Those memories were not sharp anymore, but they were still heavy. Losing that presence had changed everything. The land stayed, but the feeling left behind had never healed. In the days that followed, the rancher noticed small changes in the town. People greeted him more warmly. They asked how he was, not out of politeness, but with real concern. He answered as he always had, briefly and honestly. He did not share details, but he no longer felt the need to hide behind silence either. One day, a child wandered near the edge of his land, chasing something small and playful. The rancher noticed and walked over calmly. Instead of sending the child away, he gently guided them back toward the road. The child smiled and waved, unafraid. It surprised him. For years, he had kept distance without realizing how much it shaped the way others approached him. That moment stayed with him. He realized that people had not feared him because he was unkind, but because they did not understand him. And he had allowed that misunderstanding to grow because it felt safer than opening old wounds. Later, while repairing a fence, the rancher found himself standing closer to the untouched area than he had in years. He stopped, feeling the familiar tightness return. Instead of stepping away, he stayed where he was. He placed a hand on the fence and closed his eyes for a moment. The pain was still there, but it was different. It did not overwhelm him. It reminded him of what he had lost, but also of what he had once had. That realization surprised him. For so long, he had focused only on the loss, never on the love and meaning that had existed before it. In town, the story had shifted. People were no longer curious in a careless way. They were thoughtful. Some shared their own quiet struggles with one another, inspired by the idea that even the strongest among them carried unseen weight. The rancher's brief words had opened a door the town did not know it needed. One evening, the young helper returned not to work, but to say something he had been holding back. He stood near the gate, unsure. The rancher noticed and approached. "I didn't mean to cause pain," the young man said softly. The rancher looked at him for a long moment, then shook his head. "You didn't," he replied. "You just touched something that was already there." The young man nodded, relieved. He thanked the rancher and left. That simple exchange brought a sense of calm neither of them expected. As the season slowly changed, the rancher began to understand something important. Avoiding pain had not erased it. Carrying it alone had only made it heavier. Understanding, even without full explanation, had made it lighter. The land remained the same and the place that hurt still existed. But now it was part of his story, not something to run from. And as the town continued to grow quieter and kinder, the rancher realized that his silence had once protected him, but now honesty, spoken or unspoken, was doing the healing. The strongest change was not in the land or the town, but inside him. He was still the same man, still steady and reserved. Yet something had shifted. The past no longer stood between him and the present. It stood beside him, finally acknowledged, finally understood. The change that had begun quietly now started to reach deeper into the town. It was no longer just about the rancher or the land he avoided. It became something shared, something people felt in small moments throughout their days. The town had always believed it was close-knit, but now it was learning what real understanding looked like. The rancher noticed it first in small ways. When he walked into town, people no longer watched him with curiosity or fear. They greeted him with calm smiles, some with a nod, others with a simple good morning that felt honest. No one asked him questions about the past. No one pushed him to explain. That respect made him feel lighter than he had in years. One afternoon, a sudden storm rolled in. Dark clouds gathered quickly, and strong winds swept across the fields. Storms were common, but this one felt heavier. The rancher worked fast, securing gates and checking fences. As the rain began to fall, he noticed a section of fence near the untouched area had weakened. For a moment, he hesitated. In the past, he would have walked away and fixed it later, choosing distance over discomfort. But something inside him urged him forward. He stepped closer than he ever had before, careful but steady. The rain soaked his clothes and the wind pressed against him, but he kept moving. As he worked, memories returned, not all at once and not with force but gently. He remembered building this fence with someone who believed in the future of the ranch just as strongly as he did. They had laughed, argued about small things, and dreamed about what the land could become. Those memories did not hurt the way they once had. They were sad, yes, but they were also warm. He finished the repair and stood there for a moment, letting the rain fall. He did not step fully into the place he had avoided, but he no longer felt trapped by it either. When he finally turned away, he felt something close to relief. The storm passed by evening. The next day, the town gathered to help a family whose roof had been damaged. Without thinking, the rancher showed up. He worked alongside others, lifting, fixing, and guiding where needed. People noticed, not because he had never helped before, but because this time he stayed longer. He listened. He accepted help instead of refusing it. As the work went on, conversations flowed naturally. Someone joked, someone else shared a story. The rancher did not say much, but when he did, his words were gentle. People listened, not because he was strong, but because he was present. That evening, as the sun set, someone quietly said, "It means a lot that you came." The rancher paused, then nodded. "It felt right," he replied. That simple sentence stayed with many people. Over the next weeks, the town continued to change. People were more patient with one another. Disagreements were handled with calmer voices. The idea that pain could exist quietly without being visible had settled into their hearts. One day, the older neighbor returned again, this time bringing 2 chairs. He placed them near the fence, at a respectful distance from the untouched area. They sat together watching the land. "You don't have to talk," the neighbor said. "Just thought you might like the company." The rancher accepted it without words. They sat there for a long time. The silence between them was comfortable. The land stretched wide just as it always had. Birds passed overhead. The wind moved through the grass. Finally, the rancher spoke, his voice calm but clear. "I thought if I kept quiet long enough, the pain would fade." The neighbor nodded slowly. "Pain doesn't fade when it's ignored," he said. "It fades when it's understood." The rancher did not reply, but he felt the truth of those words settle inside him. That night, he unlocked the door to the room he had kept closed for so long. He did not rush. He stood there for a moment, then stepped inside. The room held old items carefully kept, not forgotten, just untouched. He did not feel overwhelmed. Instead, he felt steady. He did not stay long, but when he left, he closed the door gently without locking it. The town felt the change even without knowing the details. The rancher seemed more at ease. He still worked hard and spoke little, but his presence felt warmer. Children waved to him freely now. Neighbors stopped by without hesitation. The land that had once shaken him no longer controlled his steps. It was still part of his life, still meaningful, still sensitive, but no longer a barrier. By facing what hurt, even slowly and carefully, he had done something powerful. Not just for himself, but for everyone watching quietly from a distance. The town had been shaken, yes, but not in fear. It had been shaken awake. And in that awakening, they learned that understanding could grow even in the quietest places, and healing could begin without loud words or grand gestures. The rancher stood at the edge of his land one evening, watching the sky turn gold. The pain had not disappeared. But it no longer stood alone. It stood beside understanding, supported by a town that finally saw him, not as a symbol of strength, but as a human being who had carried more than anyone ever knew. The days that followed felt calmer, as if the land itself had taken a deep breath. The rancher continued his work as he always had, but now there was a softness in the way he moved through the ranch. He no longer rushed past certain paths or turned his eyes away from old places. He still respected them, still kept his distance when needed, but fear no longer guided his steps. One morning, he walked farther than he had in many years. The sun was low, and the air carried the quiet smell of earth and grass. He stopped near the place that once held so much weight. He did not step fully into it, but he stood close enough to feel its presence without feeling pulled under by it. He placed his hand on the fence and stood there in silence. He did not think about loss alone this time. He remembered effort, shared dreams, and long days filled with hope. He remembered laughter carried by the wind and plans spoken with certainty. Those memories were part of the same story as the pain, and for the first time, he allowed them to exist together. In town, people noticed how steady things felt. Life returned to its usual rhythm, but something important had changed beneath the surface. People were kinder in small ways. They listened more. They paused before judging. The rancher's quiet truth had taught them that strength did not mean being untouched. It meant continuing, even when something still hurt. One afternoon, the town held a small gathering. Nothing official, nothing loud. Just neighbors sharing food, stories, and time together. Someone invited the rancher, not expecting him to come. To their surprise, he did. He stood at the edge at first, hands in his pockets, watching. Then someone offered him a seat. He accepted. The conversation flowed naturally around him. He spoke when he felt comfortable, listened when he didn't. No one demanded more. As the sun set, someone asked a simple question about the ranch. The rancher answered, and without planning to, he shared a memory from long ago. It was brief, gentle, and honest. The group listened quietly without interrupting. When he finished, no one rushed to respond. They simply nodded, understanding that the moment mattered. That night, as he walked back to the ranch, the stars felt closer than usual. He realized something important. The pain he carried had never truly been about the land alone. It had been about carrying it alone for too long. Sharing even a small piece had not weakened him. It had freed him. Over time, the ranch continued to grow and change. Some areas were repaired, others left as they were. The rancher made those choices carefully. He learned that honoring the past did not mean staying trapped in it. It meant allowing it to be part of the present without controlling it. Children from town sometimes passed by the fences now, waving as they went. He waved back. Neighbors stopped to talk. He listened. Life did not suddenly become perfect, but it became fuller. One evening, he returned to the porch and looked out over the land. The place that once hurt still existed, and it always would. But now it stood as a reminder not only of loss, but of love, effort, and meaning. It was part of his life story, not a shadow over it. The town, too, carried that lesson forward. They remembered that day and the words that had shaken them awake. They understood now that everyone carried unseen weight, and that kindness did not require knowing every detail. As the rancher stood there, watching the light fade, he felt steady. Not because the pain was gone, but because it no longer stood alone. It stood beside understanding, memory, and quiet peace. And in that balance, both the man and the town found something lasting, not an ending, but a way to move forward together.